Greetings, friends. It's Heidi with Heidonian Living, and today we're going to continue to talk a little bit more about energy management. Well, there's all kinds of things that zap our energy, but I think one of the things that zaps it the most is having expectations that don't meet our reality. In fact, I've heard this concept explained many different ways, but if you think about, here's your expectations, right? Step back a little so you can see this better. Here's your expectations, and this arm is your reality. Well, this gap in between, like if you drew a line here, right? That is the frustration gap, right? So the further away your expectations are from your reality, the bigger the gap. So you have choices. Do you either reduce your expectations, change your reality, or some of both to close the frustration gap? This can also really lend itself to one of the core principles that Dr. Henry Cloud talks about in his Changes That Heal book, one of the books that I have already done a book recommendation on, one of those absolute life changers. You could also think about this, the gap between your ideal self, who you would like yourself to be, your perfect vision of your perfect self, who you think you should be, and then your real self, and then trying to learn, to close that gap to live in the middle. So it's a similar concept. Also, a lot of Brene Brown's work talks about our expectations and managing those so that we can live in a healthy place. And I will in the future review some of Brene Brown's work as well with my book recommendations, which of course are always only books that I think are worth your time to read. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can manage your expectations. I think one of the number one things to ask yourself when you are frustrated, disappointed, sad, angry, any of those kind of negative emotions is this based on something I expected? Whether it's I expected of myself or someone else or expected out of it, just looking at what expectation is driving this resentment, anger, sadness, frustration, whatever that is, so-called negative emotion that you're experiencing. And then secondly, asking yourself, once you figure out what that expectation is, who set this expectation for me? Did I choose this, or did I let someone else choose it for me? Whether it's from my family history, my circumstances, my faulty thinking, or somebody projecting that on me. Because often many of our expectations we have and we don't even realize that we have them, and we certainly haven't set them up against our value system to say, who told me this? Who is this? Is this something that fits with my values and my expectations? Or is this something that I'm living out because somebody else put this on me or I allowed them to? So first question is, what's the expectation here? Second question is, who set that expectation? Third question is this an expectation and a person that I personally value their approval or that outcome? Does that make sense? And then thirdly, if it is yes, that you value that person, and hear my heart as I say that, it's not that you wouldn't value someone, it's just that maybe you don't need their approval. For example, if they're a high school classmate that you haven't seen in 20 years and you're still trying to meet some expectation that they projected on you, why are you living that? It's not that you don't value them as a person, but you do not need their approval. They are not part of your core inner circle of people that you want to please in this season of your life. So it's time to let go of that expectation. Does that kind of make sense? And then if it is a yes to that, it is an expectation that you personally value and that you want to maintain, and that it also involves somebody who is in that inner circle that is important to you to meet their expectations, then asking them about if that is their expectation of you and getting clarity on that. So if you have this expectation that you think they expect of you, but you've never actually talked to them about that, they may not even want that from you. And here you are killing yourself trying to meet an expectation because you think it's important to them, and they don't even know about it, right? Okay, so let's use a real life example. Maybe you're a wife and you think that you're a failure every time you don't have a hot meal on the table. But who put that expectation on you? Was that something that your mom always did? Or maybe that's something that all the ladies at your mom's group do. They always talk about having dinner on the table. Well, just because that's important to them doesn't necessarily mean that has to be important to you. So you'd want to first evaluate, is that important to you? And if it is, why is it? Who put that expectation on you? And if it's you putting it on yourself, then, figuring out a way that you can adjust your life to meet that expectation. Now, if you think that it's important because you believe that your husband thinks it's important, but you've never actually asked him, then it's time maybe to have a conversation about this expectation. You know, honey, do you feel like I'm a failure if, as your wife, if I don't have a hot dinner on the table? And I am betting you that while he might say something like, I love it, but I don't view you as a failure, then maybe you can find a place to live in the middle, or release that expectation. You know, he probably doesn't care whether it's you or somebody else, just so there's food on the table, right? So what are some expectations that you are allowing to create frustration, resentment, anger, or feel a failure or shame in your life? And who set those expectations? Are they ones that you value? If the answer is yes, then clarify those with the people in your life that you think expect that of you. If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to let go of the false expectation that is creating all this trauma and drama in your life. Okay, one more simple example before we wrap up here. Okay, there's a huge expectation culturally, supposedly, that you should make your bed. Okay, so years ago, I only had so much energy when I was in the Depression era, and I decided to let go of that expectation because I only had so much energy. And it wasn't important to my husband, trust me, because he unmakes the bed more than ever expected for it to be made, right? It wasn't important to him. And quite honestly, it wasn't important to me either. So why was I making the bed every day? Because I would just unmake it and remake it and unmake it and remake it. And so, you know what? The bed gets made, you know, if my house cleaner is changing the sheets, that's when the bed gets made at our house. Otherwise, it goes undone. Now, if making the bed is important to you, that is something you value, don't have any guilt about it. Rock out making your bed, but just stop and think, who told you you had to make your bed? Now, if you're living in someone else's home right now, then technically you probably should honor if it's important to them to make your bed. But if you are an adult taking care of your own bills, right, like you have the right to evaluate, does my bed need made or not? And to live guiltlessly if that is not something that you personally value. I know it's a silly example, but think of all the energy. Even if all you do is spend 1 minute a day making your bed, which reality is we probably spend more than that. That's 365 minutes a year, minimally. I don't know what that is divided by 60. Okay, 365 divided by 60 times 4 is 320, right? I think. So over 4 hours a year. So what would you do? I know that doesn't sound like much, but 4 hours a year times, let's say you live 60 years, that is a whole lot of hours that you've spent living somebody else's expectation of you. Okay? So I hope this has helped you think about who said that? Who said you have to do that? Whose expectation is that? Is that something I value? If it is, or something that somebody who is important to me values, then how can I get clear on that it really is an expectation to close that frustration gap and live more of who you're called to be and find freedom in the process?